Two men have been charged with assaulting a Capitol police officer who later died during the January 6th insurrection. Julian Eli Cater of Pennsylvania and George Pierre Tanios of West Virginia appeared in federal court Monday. The men are accused of spraying Officer Brian Sicknick with an unidentified chemical during the attack. Officer Sicknick was a 12-year veteran of the force. He died one day later. Authorities have yet to determine if the chemical exposure contributed to his death. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge has been following this story for us and joins me now from Washington. Hi there, Catherine. So it has been over 2 months since the assault on the Capitol. How did law enforcement track these men down, and what more can you tell us about what happened in court Monday?
Well, the key piece of evidence, Elaine, really came to light with federal investigators within the last few weeks, and I was told it was a piece of video that was uploaded onto YouTube. It's a piece of video just sort of on the boundary of the Capitol building on the terrace, and in that video, they could see a melee, a group of men, one seen calling out for bear spray. It was passed forward, and then they used it on this group of Capitol Hill police officers. I was told that the FBI was able to pull a very clean and clear image of one of the suspects, but they were at a sort of a block, if you will, because they were not able to properly identify him. I was told through my reporting here that a tip came forward. They were able to make the identification of that individual who apparently used the bear spray on the police officers, and then also the individual who provided the bear spray from a backpack. So the bottom line is that they have been working very diligently to try and identify the circumstances surrounding Brian Sicknick's death, but it was only recently that videotape came into the possession of federal investigators that allowed them to pinpoint the individuals, now the suspects, in the assault on police officers and what they believe a contributing factor was in Sicknick's death.
So, Catherine, I mean, what you're describing, this evidence on the video, sounds to me like very strong evidence. What's your sense of it based on what you've heard from these descriptions?
Well, it is strong evidence. You're correct, Elaine. And my contacts report that it was central to identifying the suspects because, unlike some video they've had from the Capitol, this was described to me as a very clean shot of the person's facial features, and then also the action, the calling for the bear spray. But the rub here is making this connection between the use of the bear spray and the death of Capitol Hill police officer Brian Sicknick. Just to back up, bear spray is a lot like pepper spray. It can really inflame your eyes, also your respiratory system. But as I understand it, the difference between the two is that bear spray comes out of the canister at an extremely high velocity, and it can blind people in some circumstances, or if they inhale it, it can cause really severe coughing and a difficulty breathing. What we don't know yet is what the autopsy shows about Brian Sicknick's death and whether the use of this material was a contributing factor. Remember, he was sprayed in that crowd, then he went back to his office and then collapsed from his injuries. So it wasn't immediate, it was some time after the event with the spray.
And so, just so I understand, Catherine, I mean, is that why it's still not clear whether anyone will be held directly responsible for Officer Sicknick's death? Because we don't know at this point what that autopsy in fact showed.
Well, that's an excellent observation, Elaine. The autopsy is very important. It is not publicly available at this time, and very little has been said about the circumstances of Brian Sicknick's death, except for that statement almost immediately after the Capitol riots that he died of injuries sustained physically encountering other individuals. He left that scene, went back to his office, and that's when he ran into trouble and collapsed. It's going to be very difficult, a federal investigator has said to me, to draw a direct line, between the two events. And I'm sure it's caught your attention that the allegations here are assaulting a federal officer with a deadly weapon. The deadly weapon in this case would be the spray. But they've been pursuing this with the working theory that it may well have been a contributing factor in Brian Sicknick's death. And I would just encourage people to really think about some of the dimensions of this. The allegation is that these were two groups very close together, the rioters and then the Capitol Hill police officers. And allegedly an individual said, give me the bear, they didn't say spray, they said something else. I'm not going to use that word here. And it was passed forward. And then they sprayed it on these individuals in a very close contact. And so remember, bear spray comes out of the canister at a very high velocity. In some cases, it can be, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. I mean, it's like getting hit almost with a rubber bullet in that sense. And it can be extremely, extremely damaging. So I think it's important for folks at home to really pause and think about what exactly is alleged here between these groups. And then, of course, the consequence that follows. Sicknick was not the only person who suffered injuries in this incident.
Right. And as we've heard accounts from other Capitol police officers, what they've described really is combat, essentially, sort of hand-to-hand combat that lasted for hours on January 6th. Catherine, before we let you go, let's turn to another story. The FBI provided an update on that Christmas Day bombing that happened in downtown Nashville. And to remind our viewers, a 63-year-old man, Anthony Warner, died inside of an RV that was loaded with explosives. He actually used a loudspeaker to warn people to evacuate the area before the bombs went off. Catherine, what are officials saying now about this incident?
Well, the FBI has concluded their investigation. They've come to the conclusion that this was a very elaborate suicide, that this was someone whose interpersonal relationships had collapsed. This was someone who wanted to take their life, but to not take others with them, which explains the loudspeaker on that RV. And this was someone who had become deeply embedded in some conspiracy theories. But the important thing in the FBI statement is that they did not see evidence of a broader ideology in this case, and they did not see evidence that it was a conspiracy, which means that he had outside help to build the explosives, to load that RV and then to set it off last December. Boy, it seems like yesterday, that story, but it was back in December, Christmas Day.
Yeah, right. All right, Catherine Herridge in Washington for us. Catherine, always good to have you. Thank you.
You're welcome.